Hey everyone, this is Vishal and I'm back again with another video, and in this one we'll be continuing where we left off in the last one. So for a quick recap, in the last one we learned how to create a tree using JavaScript. We also wrote a few utilities to traverse the tree in order, pre-order, post-order and BFS, and by the end of the video we also saw how to traverse the DOM tree using the pre-order method. And in this one we'll be utilizing the same utility and write a few polyfills. For anyone who is new over here, this is Code Along with Vishal and we talk about front-end development on this channel. So if you're new over here, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you learn something from this channel, please share this channel in your network, and it will help others as well as it will help me a lot. So without wasting any further time, let's jump into the video. So let's first look at what we wrote in the last video. We wrote a simple generator function called traverse pre-order, which takes an input of a DOM node, and just like pre-order traversal on a binary tree, we first yield the root node and then go to the leaves, right? So just like that, even in this implementation, we first yield the root node and then we go to the leaves. So how do we go to the leaves in a DOM tree? So we just use root.children, which is a HTML collection of all the child elements of the node, and we loop over those children and call our traverse pre-order function recursively to yield each of the subtrees. Okay, so this is a very simple utility which is exactly same as how you would traverse pre-order on a binary tree. It's just that in this one we are traversing over a DOM tree. Now what I want to do in this video is utilize this traverse pre-order utility to write a few polyfills, and we will use those polyfills in our React component. So this is a very simple React component which is just painting a DOM tree with some lookup IDs and lookup classes, and we will be utilizing our traverse pre-order utility to write the polyfills for getElementById, getElementsByClass, and we will also be writing a polyfill for document.querySelector. But note that I'm not going to implement a very sophisticated solution. So I'm nowhere claiming that these polyfills that I'm going to write are going to be the exact replacement of the existing functions. So I'm just scratching the surface in this video. In your implementation, you can build upon what I've written and add your sophisticated logics or condition checks and so on, all the edge cases basically. But for the purpose of the video, we'll only be looking at the basic implementation, and it is just to learn. So don't come at me in the comments telling me that this is wrong and put a downward. Okay. All right. So now we'll start writing our polyfills. So what I'm going to do now is create a self-executing function. So I'll explain why am I creating a self-executing function in the later half of the video. But for now, let's just go with the flow and create a self-execution function called getSelectors. Okay. So this is a self-executing function. So we will write it like this. And since we need to call it immediately, we will do this. Okay. Now the first selector that I want to write, or the first polyfill that I want to write, is going to be const getElementById. So notice that in few of my starting videos on my channel, I've already written polyfills for some of these functions, but the difference that we are going to see in this implementation and in those implementations is that we are going to utilize the polyfill or utilize the traverse pre-order function and write our polyfills using this traversal logic. Okay, so let's continue on writing a getElementById. So now getElementById is going to take up argument called lookup ID. Okay, so this is the ID which the user is looking for, and we are now going to let's just fix these errors first. So at the end we need to return something. So yeah, and I want to return the polyfill that I'm writing right now. So getElementById. Okay. All right, now let's go back to the implementation. So getElementById takes an argument lookup ID. So this is the ID that the user wants to look up, and all we need to do now is we'll write a for loop. Okay, so we need to loop over each of the nodes of the DOM tree and find whether that node's ID is matching the lookup ID. So how do we visit each of the nodes? We already have a function traverse pre-order. Okay, so all we need to do is let node of traverse pre-order, and we will pass document dot body to this. So document dot body will be our entry point for all of the polyfills that I'm going to write over here. Okay, so document dot body is the node that I'm going to pass for the traverse pre-order function. Okay, now notice that I'm directly using for loop over here, and this is a for of loop. So since this is a generator, I can use the for of loop. Okay, so this is going to generate a value, and for of loop will basically take the yielded value into the node argument over here. Now we have the node with us. So all we need to do now is check whether the node.id is matching the lookup ID or not. If it does, then we just return the node. Okay, very simple implementation. Another thing that I want to do here is, since this is a function, I want to export from here. So I'll just write export default get selectors. Okay, so now this is a self-executing function. It is already returning a getElementById over here. Now all I need to do is go here and import my selectors from the utils.js. This is a default export, so we can just write get selectors, or I can just write it as selectors. Okay, now in my component, I'll just use the selectors import and get element by ID, and in my React, use effect function. So people who don't know React or have less experience with React, don't worry. This is just understand that we are going to work on this DOM. Okay, so whatever the IDs that I'm going to look up for is going to be these IDs only, the ones that you're seeing over here. Okay, so just understand that we are just going to call our getElementById function and pass an ID that is defined over here. Okay, so first we will do look up ID. Okay, so this is one, and let's do another ID. So there is another ID over here. Oops. And we will do nested DOM lookup ID over here. So let's get this nested DOM lookup ID. All right, now let's head to our browser and see if both the DOMs are retrieved properly or not. So here's my browser. You can already see the result, but let me zoom that a bit and hit a refresh again, and you can see that we are able to retrieve our lookup ID as well as nested DOM lookup ID using our getElementById polyfill. Okay, so very simple polyfill. We just used our traverse pre-order function and got the result. Now similarly, we will be writing another polyfill for get elements by class. Okay, so here the argument will be look up class. Okay, so now in this implementation again, so for me to loop over to visit each of the nodes, I need to just call the traverse pre-order function and verify whether the lookup class is there on the node or not. Okay, so how do we do that? So first let's create a result array over here. So since this is going to return multiple elements, we are going to use an array over here. So const result equal to an empty array. We will write for let node of traverse pre-order document dot body. All right, so now we have the node with us. All we need to do is check whether the node dot class list dot contains our lookup class or not. Okay, So this is it. This is all we need to do. And what we are going to do now is result.push of node. Okay. And after the loop is ended, we will just return the result from here. Okay. So now we have two of our polyfills ready. We just need to add our getElementsByClass over here. All right, so now let's head back to our component and let's use our getElementsByClass polyfill as well. And let's replace this one with getElementsByClass, and let's look up for this class. Okay, so now the result should be an array of 3 elements, one section, one div, and one p tag. Okay, so let's head back to our browser and hit a refresh again, and you can see that we have the section, div, and the p tag. Okay, so wherever you see lookup class, all of those elements are now console logged onto the screen. All right, now okay, now let's go back to our component again. So here we did very quickly wrote two polyfills. So one is getElementById, one is getElementsByClass. As a bonus step, let's do one more thing. So if there are multiple getElementsById or getElementsByClass on my page and they are all looking for the same ID, so I don't want to traverse my DOM tree again and again. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is implement a caching mechanism. Okay, so that's why I'm using a self-executing function over here, and we will use the concept of closure to achieve the caching mechanism. Okay, so the people who don't know what closure is, I'll tag the video in the description and in the info tag, and you can just go watch that video first, and you will get what I'm talking about. Okay, so we will now write a simple cache over here, and let's say look up IDs. It's going to be an object, and lookup classes is going to be an object again. So what we are going to do is whatever the lookup ID is being supplied over here, we will look whether we have already retrieved the result for that or not. If we have already retrieved it, we will read it from the cache, and we will not go through the loop again. Okay, so to do that, well, first thing that we need to do is whenever we got the result, we need to update the cache with that info, right? So we will do cache of lookup ID equal to the node. Okay, this is the first thing that we do, and at the starting of the function we will put the if condition, which is going to be cache dot has own property of lookup ID. If it has the property, that time all we are going to do is return the result from cache. Okay, cache of oh, I'm sorry, so this should be cache dot lookup IDs dot has own property of lookup ID, and this should be dot lookup IDs of lookup ID. I think this is correct. Okay, dot lookup IDs dot, or we should just do this and lookup ID. Okay, now all I'm going to do now is put a console.info over here, which will say reading from cache. Okay, it's just so that we can understand what's happening. All right, so this is only for getElementsById. Let's first execute this and see if it is working. Then we will update our getElementsByClass as well. So we go back to the browser, hit a refresh. Of course, we will not be able to see this at the moment, but let's repeat this several times. And you can see that the first one is directly the first one is going through the for loop and looking up for the lookup ID, but the next ones are directly being read from the cache. Okay, so our caching mechanism is working fine for our getElementsById function. Okay, now we need to implement the same thing in result as well. So what we are going to do now is cache. Oops. Okay, so the result is coming here, right? So we will do cache dot lookup class says, okay, yeah, so cache dot lookup classes of lookup class equal to the result. Okay, and before any of these things happen, we will do a if cache dot lookup classes dot has own property of lookup class, then it has to just return cache lookup classes of lookup class. All right, now we will do the same thing over here as well. So let's move this in our getElementsByClass function as well. So we have the console.info reading from cache. Let's give it some more details. So this is for getElementByClass and this one is for getElementById. So these two things are ready now, and let's go back to our component. Let's repeat this and see what happens. So it refreshed and you can see that the first time when it read, it went through the loop, it went through the entire DOM tree and fetched those lookup classes for me. But for the second time, it just read it from the cache. Okay, so you can see that over here. So my caching mechanism is working fine for these two use cases. So we have already done two of the polyfills, which is getElementById and getElementsByClass. Now we will write the polyfill for our document.querySelector. So now let's write our polyfill for querySelector as well. So we will create a new function over here called const query selector equal to the arrow function first, and this will receive our query. Okay, so this is going to generally how the query selector works is you pass your queries as let me show that over here. So the query will be a string, which when I want to query for an ID, it will be hash lookup ID, and if I want a class, I'll write dot lookup class, and if I want the if I want to look for a lookup class inside lookup ID, we just pass the query like this. Okay, so I'll be implementing this kind of polyfill for now. So we'll just do a lookup ID space lookup class kind of polyfill. So it can take up many complicated queries as well, like adjacent selector and so on, but adjacent child selector and so on, right? So you can write a complex query in the string as well, but we will not be writing the polyfill for the exact implementation of the query selector. So this is just to give you an idea. So we're just going to cover a basic one, which is hash lookup ID, that is the ID space a lookup class. Okay, so now we know that the query will be passed as a string to us. So we will try to convert these into an array. So the way we would do that is we will write query dot split. Sorry. Okay, so we will write query dot split on space. Okay, so there is a space over here, so we'll be splitting on space, and just to make sure that there are not additional spaces, we will just map it to the string, and this str will be trimming this string. Okay. Alright. So now we have queries in an array for us. Now we'll use a while loop, and the condition would be while query dot length. Okay, so as long as there are queries in the array, we want to execute this function. So execute this loop. So while query dot length, and let's create uh, another variable which will be current node, which would be document dot body. Okay, so we'll do this and current node. So as long as there is query dot length, as long as there are queries, and as long as there is current node, we want to go to the while loop. Okay. Now inside the while loop, we want what is the current const current query is equal to we want the first query, which is by using shift function. We are basically removing this query out of our queries array and storing that inside our current query. Okay. Now all we need to do is, since we already have a function traverse pre-order, we will use the same function to loop over all of my DOM nodes. So we will use the same thing, node of traverse pre-order of current node. Okay, so our current node is pointing at document.body. So this is the case. Now we need to also see, okay, let's try to write it first and then we will look at the other conditions. So let node of traverse pre-order, we got the node. Now if node dot matches, so matches is a regex matching function which a node already has. Okay, so we will just do node dot matches our current query. If it matches, so we need to break this, and we need to say current node equal to node. So we assign the current node with the node that matches our query, and we need to also, if it is not matching with anything, then we need to also set it to null. The current node has to be null. So we will create another variable over here. Let found equal to false. So initially it is not found, but once it is found, we will set it to true. And if it is found, we need to set the current node equal to node. If nothing matches the query, that time this loop, our found is still going to be false, right? So we will do not of found. If not found, then current node will be null. So the reason why we want to do this is so that our while loop then breaks, because the query itself is not matching anything. But we are more interested in what's happening with this when there is a match. Okay. So when the current query is matching, so let's say when this split is done, so our queries is divided into lookup ID and lookup class. So when we are going with lookup ID, so when the node matches with lookup ID, we say found equal to true. We say found equal to true, and the current node becomes the lookup ID. Now, since the current node is becoming the lookup ID, in the next while loop, the lookup class query will then run on the lookup ID node instead of the document.body node. So this is basically saying we found the initial query DOM node. Now the next query that we are going to apply is going to be applied on the children of this particular DOM node. Okay, so this is what this means. So once we have found it, we are setting the current node for the next iteration to be lookup ID. Now when the next iteration is happening, again this dot lookup class will become the current query, and node dot matches the current query will again be true, and current node equal to node. So now we have the lookup class inside our current node. Okay, now for the next iteration, now found is again true. So again in the next iteration, now the query dot length is completely diffused, so there is no query dot length, and the current node is now holding the result of the node that we are trying to look up for. Okay, so we are trying to look up for a lookup ID, lookup class node which is inside lookup ID. So this is what the current node is currently holding. So once the while loop is diffused, we'll just go for return current node. This is our result. Okay, so let's go back to our function, and let's go back to our component, and now it has another function. Okay, I have not added to the export, so let's do it here. querySelector. Now here querySelector, and all I need to do now is write querySelector, sorry, and now we want to look up for let's do both. So first would be lookup for lookup ID dot lookup class. Oops. Okay, and the second one is nested DOM lookup ID lookup class. Okay, so we want to look for both of these things. So let me verify if everything is okay. All right, now let's add another case where this particular class is not there. Okay, so let's go to our browser. Okay, something is broken. All right, so let's go to our querySelector. We are getting null. Okay, so I found the mistake over here. So I'm doing a query.length rather than queries.length. So it should be on queries array rather than the query string, right? So that was a mistake. So if I do queries.length and go back to my browser, you can see that I'm able to find the lookup class which is there inside my which is there inside my lookup ID. So lookup ID dot lookup class, which is a section. Okay, so we got a section over here. Now the next one was nested DOM lookup ID and lookup class. So this is the div and this is the p tag. So p tag is right here, and the third one is a dummy which is not there, hence we are getting a null. Okay, so our simple utility for querySelector is also working fine. All right, so that's all I wanted to talk about in this one. So we could see that how a simple concept of tree traversal can help us write our polyfills so easily. Of course, I've written polyfills for getElementsByClass and my previous videos as well. But writing the polyfill with the idea of traversal, tree traversal in our mind makes it so easy compared to what we did in the other video. So that's what I really wanted to cover in this video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel. It gives me a lot of motivation to keep recording, to keep bringing new topics to you guys. Please follow me on Instagram if you want to talk to me. I generally respond to all the messages I get over there. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this one. See you in the next one. Bye.